Please leave a comment where you are watching in the world. Please submit your horror to us via our email in the description. Now please relax and enjoy. Story 1. A few years ago, I had this girl, let's call her Sarah, absolutely begging me to take her out. She'd been dropping hints for weeks, always texting, always trying to get my attention. I wasn't really looking to date anyone at the time, but she was persistent, and I thought, why not? She seemed fun, interesting, and more than a little confident, which I liked. The only catch was that I don't drive, so she had to come pick me up. She didn't seem to mind. In fact, she joked about it, saying it gave her an excuse to show off her car. So, the night came, and she picked me up in this shiny little coupe that looked like it had just rolled off the lot. She was dressed to kill too. Hair done, makeup flawless, the whole deal. I'll admit, I was impressed. She'd clearly put some effort into this, and I figured the least I could do was try to make it a good night. We ended up going to this restaurant on the other side of town, a nice little spot that wasn't too fancy, but wasn't a dive either. It had a cozy vibe, the kind of place where you sit down and feel like the night's going to be easy and enjoyable. Everything started off well. We were laughing, swapping stories, and just clicking in that effortless way that doesn't happen often. I had her laughing so hard at one point she almost snorted her drink, which, honestly, made me laugh even harder. She wasn't boring at all, far from it. She was sharp, witty, and had this infectious energy that made it easy to just keep the conversation going. For a while I thought, maybe this could actually turn into something. But then, just as we were finishing up the meal, something started to feel wrong. At first, it was subtle, a little lightheadedness, like I'd stood up too fast. I tried to ignore it, but it quickly got worse. My vision started to blur, and I could feel that familiar wave of nausea and dizziness creeping in. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened to me. I've passed out before, though it's rare, and I usually get enough warning to sit down or brace myself. But this time, it hit me fast, too fast. I tried to say something to warn her, but the words didn't come out. The next thing I knew, the world tilted, and I was out cold. I don't remember hitting the floor, but when I came to, I was lying there, staring up at the ceiling of the restaurant. For a moment, I was disoriented, trying to piece together what had happened. Then it hit me. I'd passed out at the table during the date. Not exactly the kind of impression you want to make. I sat up, looking around, and that's when I realized she was gone. Sarah wasn't there. The seat across from me was empty, and there was no sign of her anywhere in the restaurant. Instead, the owner of the place was standing over me, arms crossed, looking more annoyed than concerned. He asked me if I was okay, and before I could even answer, he started hassling me about the bill. Apparently, Sarah had just left. No goodbye, no checking to see if I was alright, nothing. She'd vanished, leaving me to deal with the awkwardness and the check. I didn't have much choice. I paid the bill, thanked the owner for not calling an ambulance because, let's be honest, I couldn't afford that, and walked out into the cold night air. That's when it really hit me. She'd just left me there. I checked my phone, hoping for a text or a voicemail, some kind of explanation, but there was nothing. I tried calling a few friends, desperate for a ride home, but no one was answering. It was late, and most of them were probably asleep. To top it off, there's no public transportation in our area, so I didn't even have that as an option. So I walked. 11 miles. 11 freezing, miserable miles, alone in the dark, replaying the night over and over in my head. I couldn't believe she'd just left me there, like I was nothing. I mean, sure, passing out at the table probably wasn't the highlight of her night, but to just leave? Who does that? By the time I got home, my feet were killing me, and I was too angry and exhausted to think straight. I collapsed into bed, still trying to wrap my head around what had happened. A week later, I ran into her at a coffee shop. I hadn't planned on saying anything. I figured she'd just ignore me or pretend not to recognize me. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear her side of the story, to know what could possibly justify ditching someone like that. So I walked up to her and asked, as casually as I could, "Hey, what happened that night? Where'd you go?" The look on her face said it all. She rolled her eyes, let out this exaggerated sigh, and then called me a freak. A freak. She didn't even try to explain herself. Instead, she told me to go crawl under a rock and die. Just like that. No apology, no remorse, nothing. It was like I wasn't even a person to her. Just some inconvenience she couldn't be bothered to deal with. That was it for me. The final straw. I'd already been feeling pretty disillusioned with dating, but that experience sealed the deal. I gave up. I stopped trying to find someone to be with, stopped putting myself out there. What was the point? Every time I tried, it seemed like I ended up being treated like garbage. I poured everything I had into that night, trying to make it fun, trying to connect. And in the end, I got abandoned on the floor of a restaurant and walked 11 miles home in the cold. Story 2. My worst date is also, in some twisted way, my best date because of how hilariously disastrous it turned out to be. But at the time, it was something else. It happened the day after my 25th birthday. My actual birthday had been amazing. My friends went all out for me, and I was feeling pretty loved and celebrated. But the day after, completely different story. Everyone was busy, caught up in their own lives, and I found myself sitting at home feeling kind of lonely. You know that post-birthday crash? Yeah, it hit me hard. That's when I got a call from this guy who had been asking me out for months. He was nice, persistent, and honestly I figured, why not? It's better than sitting here feeling sorry for myself. I said yes, and he showed up at my place in what felt like 5 minutes flat. I wasn't even close to ready. I was literally about to hop in the shower when he knocked on my door. I told him to make himself comfortable while I got ready and headed into the bathroom. That's when he said he needed to use the toilet. I mean, okay, no big deal. I only had one bathroom, so I figured he'd be quick. Except he wasn't. He was in there forever. Now, I don't know exactly what he was doing in there, but let's just say it wasn't a quick pee. He also decided it would be a great time to talk to me through the shower curtain while I tried to wash my hair. I don't remember what he was rambling about, something about his dog, I think, but I do remember having to yell over the sound of the water for him to please step out so I could actually get dressed. Not exactly the vibe I was going for before a date, but hey, I was trying to stay optimistic. I threw on some clothes, but I didn't have time to do my makeup, so I grabbed my bag and figured I'd slap some on in the car. As we walked out to his car, he told me we were going to dinner. Cool, right? Except I didn't have any cash on me, so I asked him to stop at an ATM on the way. He pulled up to the machine, and I got out to grab some money. That's when it happened. He ran over my foot. I'm not even joking. The man rolled his car over my foot. I yelped, and he immediately panicked, throwing the car into reverse and pulling off my poor squished foot. Thankfully, nothing was broken. It hurt like hell, but I could still walk, so I waved it off and told him I was fine. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, even though I probably should have. I mean, who runs over their date's foot on the way to dinner? But again, I was trying to stay positive. Maybe this was just a weird fluke, and the rest of the night would go smoothly. Spoiler alert, it didn't. We got to the restaurant, and things started off all right. We sat down, ordered some food, and started talking. Or rather, I tried to talk. Every time I said anything remotely interesting, he'd interrupt me with, "Oh my God, that reminds me of this episode of Family Guy." And then he would proceed to reenact entire scenes from the show, voices and all. It wasn't just once or twice, it was constant. I'd be mid-sentence, telling a story, and he'd cut me off to do his best Peter Griffin impression. At one point, I just gave up and let him go on a 5-minute tangent about Stewie. I sat there, nodding and smiling, wondering if this was some kind of hidden camera prank. Then the check came. The total was $45, not outrageous, considering we both ordered entrees and drinks. I picked up the check and told him the amount, kind of expecting him to grab it since he'd asked me out. Instead, he looked at me and said, "So, do you want to go Dutch, or?" I stared at him, trying to process what I'd just heard. Before I could respond, he added, I've got $18 on me." $18. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I ended up covering the rest of the bill, plus the tip, because what else could I do? At that point, I was pretty much done. I told him I wasn't feeling well and just wanted to go home. He seemed to take it in stride and asked if I wanted to rent a movie and hang out. Rent a movie? With what money? I knew he didn't have any, and after covering dinner, I wasn't about to spend more. I told him I really wasn't feeling great and just needed to sleep. Thankfully, he agreed to drive me home. When we pulled into my driveway, I was ready to bolt out of the car and put the whole night behind me. But then he said, "Wait, I got something for you." He reached into the back seat and pulled out 2 gifts. The first was a bottle of aphrodisiac lotion. Yes, you read that right, aphrodisiac lotion. The second was a fake gold and rhinestone tennis bracelet that looked like it came from a clearance bin at the dollar store. He handed them to me with this big, proud grin, like he'd just given me the crown jewels. I was so stunned I didn't even know how to respond. Before I could say anything, he leaned in for a kiss and said, I had a really great time tonight. At that point, I just wanted to escape. I mumbled something about needing to go inside, grabbed my stuff, or so I thought, and practically sprinted to my front door. It wasn't until later that I realized I'd left my makeup bag in his car. Here's the kicker, he was genuinely a nice guy. That's what made the whole thing so much worse. He wasn't trying to be awful, he just was. And because he was so nice, I felt like the biggest jerk for being annoyed. I kept replaying the night in my head, wondering if I'd overreacted or if maybe I was the problem. But then I'd think about the aphrodisiac lotion or the Family Guy impressions, and I'd remember why I wanted to crawl into a hole and never speak of this date again. Story 3. I still laugh every time I think about the most awkward and unintentionally hilarious date I've ever witnessed. To be clear, it wasn't my date, but I had front row seats to the entire train wreck. It all went down in one of those cozy, low-key coffee shops you find in every college town. You know the type, cheap coffee, mismatched furniture, local art on the walls. It was a perfect spot for broke college students trying to impress someone without spending more than $5. I used to go there a lot with my sketchbook to practice drawing people, and that night, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. I'd grabbed a corner seat with a good view of the room, quietly sketching people as they came and went. That's when I noticed a couple sitting at a nearby table. It was obvious they were on a first date. There's a certain awkwardness that's hard to miss. She was petite, with a shy demeanor, nervously sipping her coffee and glancing around like she wasn't sure what to do with her hands. He, on the other hand, was the complete opposite, loud, energetic, and clearly trying to impress her. At first, I thought, okay, maybe he's just nervous. First dates can be weird. But then I tuned into their conversation, and oh man, it was something else. The guy was in the middle of explaining the plot of The Rock. Yes, the 1996 action movie starring Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage. At first, I thought it was just a passing comment. Maybe he'd toss out a quick summary and move on to something else. But no, this man was not summarizing the movie. He was dictating the entire screenplay, scene by scene, line by line, with commentary. I kid you not, he was breaking down the nuances of Nicolas Cage's character like he was lecturing a film studies class. He leaned in, gesturing wildly with his hands, his voice full of enthusiasm. So like Nicolas Cage plays this FBI chemical weapons specialist, right? And he's kind of a nerd, but he's also a total badass when the chips are down. It's brilliant. And Sean Connery? Oh man, he's this ex-con who escaped from Alcatraz, and he's the only one who knows how to break into Alcatraz. Isn't that insane? Like, it's just such a clever concept. He wasn't even pausing to breathe. Meanwhile, the poor girl was doing her best to be polite. I could tell she was trying. She gave him a couple of ahas, and oh, that's interesting, here and there, and even tried to steer the conversation in another direction. At one point, she said something like, "Oh, that reminds me of this other movie I saw recently." But he completely steamrolled her. He cut her off with a quick, "Oh, where was I?" and dove right back into describing how Sean Connery's character steals a Humvee and leads a high-speed chase through the streets of San Francisco. By this point, I was losing it. I was trying to sketch this guy, but I kept having to stop because I was laughing so hard. I mean, who does this? Who goes on a first date and spends 20 minutes describing the plot of The Rock? The girl's patience was honestly impressive. She smiled, nodded, and even tried to make eye contact a few times, but as the minutes dragged on, I could see her resolve starting to crack. Her shoulders slumped, her smile became strained, and she started checking her watch and her phone in turns. It was like watching someone slowly realize they'd made a terrible mistake. The guy, of course, was completely oblivious. He was too busy describing the brilliant tension in the scene where Nicolas Cage has to defuse a chemical weapon while under fire. And the green balls of VX gas? Genius. Absolute genius. You can't make this stuff up. He actually slapped the table for emphasis, which made her flinch. I almost felt bad for her, but at the same time, I couldn't look away. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash. Horrible, but you just can't stop staring. After what felt like an eternity, she finally snapped. Well, not snapped exactly, but she reached her breaking point. She put her coffee cup down, plastered on a fake smile, and said, "Hey, I'm really sorry, but I've got a big test on Monday, and my mom's coming into town tomorrow, so I think I need to head out." It was the verbal equivalent of pulling the emergency brake. The guy, bless his clueless heart, stood up and started putting on his jacket, fully expecting to walk her out. But before he could even process what was happening, she grabbed her bag, bolted for the door, and called over her shoulder, "Later," with a little wave. The look on his face was priceless. He stood there for a moment, jacket half on, trying to figure out what had just happened. Then he slowly sat back down, looking genuinely confused. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. But then I thought about the girl, and how she'd just endured 20 minutes of the rock fanboying, and decided she was the real MVP. After she left, the guy stayed at the table for a while, staring into his coffee like it held the answers to life's greatest mysteries. I finished my sketch, packed up my stuff, and left before he could start explaining the plot of Con Air to someone else. That night taught me two things. First, some people are so oblivious to social cues that they'll talk about Nicolas Cage movies until their date literally runs away. And second, not everyone can appreciate the magic of Nick Cage. Story 4. Oh man, this one takes the cake. Okay, buckle up, because this is the story of how I ended up dating a drug dealer. Yes, you read that right. Why I somehow stuck around longer than I should have, and how I learned that an all-women's college does absolutely nothing for your ability to judge men. Let me set the stage. I'd been seeing this guy for a little while. We weren't super serious or anything, but I thought he was cool enough, funny, charming, and way too confident for his own good. He had this whole bad boy vibe going on, which in hindsight should have been a red flag, but at the time I thought, hey, maybe this will be exciting. Spoiler alert, it was not the kind of excitement I was looking for. So one night, we're out driving around. He's playing music way too loud, and I'm just kind of vibing, enjoying the ride, when he suddenly says, "Hey, I need to stop somewhere real quick." I figured he meant a gas station, or maybe a friend's house. Normal stuff. But no, he pulls into the middle of the projects, and not like the edge or a well-lit area, but deep into the heart of it. Then he parks in this abandoned parking lot that looks like something out of a horror movie. You know the type. Cracked asphalt, weeds growing up through the concrete, not a single streetlight working. That parking lot. And then he just leaves. He doesn't say much, just something vague like, "I'll be back in a minute," and gets out of the car. I'm sitting there like, wait, what? You're just leaving me here. But before I can even process it, he's gone, disappearing into the shadows like some kind of sketchy Batman. I'm left alone in the dark in the middle of nowhere, in a parking lot that's clearly seen better days. My phone had like 12% battery, and I'm thinking, this is how it ends. This is how I die. Minutes crawl by, and I'm trying to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, but my brain is going full panic mode. Every noise I hear makes me jump. Was that a footstep? A cat? A murderer? I was half convinced I'd end up on the news. Local woman found in abandoned parking lot, boyfriend nowhere to be found. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to 30 minutes, he finally comes back. And oh boy, he does not come back empty-handed. He's carrying a jar of the stankiest weed I've ever smelled in my life, like you could get a contact high just being near it. But that's not all. He's also got these bags and bags of other stuff. Pills. Crack. Things I didn't even know what to name. I'm sitting there staring at him like, what the hell did I just sign up for? But instead of saying anything, I just kind of laugh nervously, because what else do you do in that situation? We drive off, and I'm trying to play it cool, but my mind is racing. Is this guy a full-on drug dealer? What did I just witness? Am I an accomplice now? He's talking like it's just another Tuesday, completely unbothered, and I'm over here reevaluating all my life choices. The night doesn't end there, though. Oh no, it gets better, or worse, depending on how you look at it. He drops me off at my place, and for some reason, I'm still trying to salvage the evening. I don't know if it was adrenaline or denial or just plain stupidity, but when he leans in for a kiss goodnight, I go with it. And as we're kissing, my hands kind of wander, just casually exploring like you do. That's when I feel something hard near his waist, right where his belt buckle should be. Except it's not his belt buckle. I pull back, confused, and ask, hey, what's the gun for? Because yes, it was a gun. A whole-ass gun, just chilling on his hip like this was the Wild West or something. Without missing a beat, he smiles and says, "Oh, don't worry about it. Just understand that when you're with me, you're safe." Safe. Safe. I didn't feel safe. I felt like I was one wrong move away from being an accessory to a crime I didn't even know about. Then, as if that wasn't unsettling enough, he casually adds, "Hey, you want to go into the woods and shoot shit?" And that's when it hit me. He might have meant me. I'm not saying he did, but let's just say the thought crossed my mind, and I decided I wasn't about to find out. I politely declined, saying something about being tired, and practically bolted into my house. I locked the door behind me and just stood there for a minute, trying to process everything. What just happened? Did I actually just date a drug dealer with a gun? Now here's the kicker. You'd think this would be the end of the story, right? That I'd see the red flags, cut ties, and never look back. Nope. The worst part is I kept dating him. For months. Months. I don't even have a good excuse for it. He wasn't a bad guy, believe it or not. He was funny, charming, and always made me laugh. But, there was also the whole drug dealer with a gun thing, which, yeah, in hindsight, maybe should have been a deal breaker. We kept dating until he eventually went to jail, which, let's be honest, was probably the universe stepping in and saying, "Girl, what are you doing with your life?" When he got locked up, I finally had my wake-up call and moved on. But to this day, I look back on that whole experience and just shake my head. This is what happens when you go to an all-women's college, by the way. Male judgment? None. Zero. I had no idea how to spot a red flag, let alone a whole parade of them. If a guy was funny and paid attention to me, I was like, sure, let's see where this goes. Spoiler, it usually went nowhere good. Story 5. Oh boy, let me take you back to one of the most hilariously awful dates I've ever been a part of. It was high school, those awkward, glorious years when you think you've got everything figured out, but in reality, you're just a walking disaster waiting to happen. This particular night, it was one for the books. So, my buddy and I had managed to set up a double date. We were pretty proud of ourselves, honestly. 2 girls, 1 night, and in our minds, it was going to be a great time. The plan was simple. Hit up the local bowling alley, throw some strikes, maybe impress them with our non-existent bowling skills, and call it a win. Easy enough, right? We show up at the bowling alley, and of course it's packed. This was the spot to hang out on a weekend night, so we weren't surprised when they told us there'd be a 30-minute wait for a lane. No big deal. We had time to kill, and there were plenty of ways to entertain ourselves. The 4 of us wandered around for a bit, checking out the arcade games and the snack stand, before eventually stumbling upon the air hockey tables. Now, these air hockey tables weren't exactly in the best condition. They were old, scuffed up, and for some reason, they were positioned ridiculously close to each other, like maybe 3 inches apart. Who thought that was a good idea? I don't know, but we decided to make the most of it. The girls claimed one table, and my buddy and I took the other. They were having their own little giggle fest, barely managing to keep the puck on the table, while my friend and I, well, we were locked in what could only be described as an unofficial air hockey championship. We were serious. Full force, high speed, trash talking, sweat on the brow kind of serious. Every point felt like life or death. Meanwhile, the girls were just kind of flailing at their table, laughing at each other, and barely paying attention to the game. To them, air hockey was just a cute distraction. To us, it was war. Now, here's where things started to go off the rails. I was in the zone, laser focused on that puck as it zipped back and forth across the table. My buddy was giving it his all, firing shots at me like his life depended on it. Then, in one particularly aggressive move, I went for a block. I hit the puck with just enough force, and at just the right angle, that it launched off the table. I swear, it was like something out of a slow-motion movie. The puck flew through the air in this perfect arc, and nailed my friend's date square in the forehead. I'll never forget the sound it made. It wasn't a loud smack, but more of a dull thunk, like when you drop a book onto carpet. For a second, everything froze. My buddy and I just stared at her, wide-eyed, as the puck bounced off her head and clattered to the ground. The girl's giggles stopped immediately, replaced by a stunned silence. And then the crying started. She let out this loud, high-pitched wail, clutching her forehead like she'd just been hit by a brick. Her friend rushed to her side, looking horrified, while my buddy and I stood there like a couple of deer in headlights. I mean, what do you even say in a situation like that? Oops, my bad? Hey, at least it wasn't the paddle. There was no saving it. The 2 girls bolted for the bathroom, one crying and the other trying to comfort her. My buddy and I just stood there, staring at each other across the air hockey table. And in that moment, we both came to the same unspoken conclusion. This date was over. We absolutely had to finish the match. I mean, come on. We were in the middle of an epic battle. Sure, the girls were mad, but the game was tied, and there was no way we were going to leave it unfinished. So, while they were off in the bathroom tending to her forehead, we went right back at it. Full send. Puck flying, paddles slamming, the works. It was like the crying in the background didn't even register. We were locked in. And let me tell you, it was one of the most intense matches I've ever played. Every shot felt like it could be the game winner. My buddy was pulling out tricks I'd never seen before, spinning the puck, banking it off the walls, anything to throw me off my game. But I held my ground. In the end, I scored the winning point with a perfectly executed shot right down the middle. Victory was mine. Of course, by the time we finished, the girls still hadn't come back. We figured we should probably check on them, so we wandered over to the bathroom area, trying to act casual. When they finally came out, the vibe was, let's just say, tense. My friend's date had this red mark on her forehead, and she was giving me a look that could have melted steel. Her friend wasn't much better. They both looked like they were ready to leave. We tried to salvage the night, but it was no use. They weren't interested in bowling anymore, and honestly, I couldn't blame them. After some awkward goodbyes, they left, and my buddy and I were left standing there, feeling a mix of guilt and hilarity. I mean, yeah, we felt bad about the whole puck to the forehead thing, but at the same time, come on. It was kind of funny. On the drive home, we couldn't stop laughing about it. The way the puck had flown through the air, the thunk when it hit, the way they'd just immediately run off. It was like something out of a sitcom. And of course, we kept rehashing the match itself, arguing over whose moves were better and whether my winning shot was pure skill or just luck. For the record, it was definitely skill. Looking back, that night was a total disaster, but it was also one of the funniest things I've ever experienced. Sure, the date was a bust, and I'm pretty sure those girls never wanted to see us again. But hey, we had a story to tell. And honestly, I'd do it all over again just for that moment of pure, ridiculous chaos. Story 6. So, this all started when I met this girl on Facebook. We'll call her Sarah. She and I had been chatting back and forth for weeks, and things seemed to be going well. She was cute, funny, and easy to talk to, at least online. I'm not exactly the most outgoing guy in real life, so I was already psyching myself up for the idea of meeting her in person. But when she suggested we go see a movie together, I thought, alright, this could be fun. To make it less intimidating, we decided to make it a double date. I brought my best friend, and she brought hers. Safe, easy, no pressure. Or so I thought. The night of the date rolls around, and I was already nervous as hell. My friend, who I'll call Jake, was hyped and trying to keep me calm, but my brain was doing backflips. I kept thinking about all the ways things could go wrong. Would she think I was boring? Would I say something stupid? What if I tripped over my own feet or spilled popcorn everywhere? You know, the usual overthinking spiral. But then we got to the theater, and things got weird before we even made it inside. Sarah was there, looking cute as ever and smiling when we showed up. Her best friend seemed nice too, and for a minute I thought, okay, maybe this won't be so bad. Then out of nowhere, this guy walks up. He's tall, built like a linebacker, and has this serious, no-nonsense look on his face. Turns out, it was her older brother. At first, I thought he was just there to check us out. You know, make sure his little sister wasn't going out with total creeps. Fair enough. I didn't mind. It's kind of sweet in a protective sibling kind of way. But then he didn't leave. Nope. This dude was staying. To watch the movie. With us. I didn't even know how to react. Like, was this normal? Was he just the third wheel to every date she went on? I shot Jake a look, and he just raised his eyebrows like, don't ask me, dude. Sarah didn't seem thrilled about it either, but she didn't say anything. So I figured maybe this was just their family dynamic, and I'd have to roll with it. But oh, it got worse. When we got into the theater, I was fully expecting to sit next to Sarah. You know, the girl I was actually on the date with? Makes sense, right? Wrong. Her brother made sure to park himself right between us. Not only that, but he also sat there with his arms crossed like some kind of human wall, completely shutting down any chance of interaction. I mean, what was I supposed to do? Lean over him to talk to her? Pass notes like we were in middle school? The whole vibe was so uncomfortable that even Jake, who's usually the most outgoing guy I know, was dead silent the entire time. It was like the brother's presence just sucked all the air out of the room. The movie itself was fine, I guess. I couldn't tell you much about it, because I spent the whole time overthinking every little thing. Should I try to make a joke to break the ice? Would her brother get mad if I laughed too loudly? Was it weird that I hadn't said a word to Sarah since we sat down? I was trapped in my own head, and by the time the credits rolled, I was ready to crawl into a hole and disappear. After the movie, things didn't get any better. Her brother was still glued to her side, so there was no opportunity for one-on-one conversation. I tried to make some small talk with her and her friend, but it was painfully awkward. Jake wasn't much help either. He was clearly picking up on the weird vibes and seemed just as eager to leave as I was. Eventually, we all said our goodbyes, and that was that. Or so I thought. Later that night, Sarah messaged me to apologize. She explained that her brother had insisted on coming along because he was worried about her meeting someone from the internet, which, okay, I get. I mean, I guess that's fair to a degree. But still, it killed the whole date, and she seemed to know it. I told her it was fine and tried to downplay how awkward it had been, but deep down, I knew I'd blown it. I couldn't help feeling like I'd been set up to fail. After that, things between us started to fizzle out. At first, she just seemed a little distant, like she wasn't as enthusiastic about our conversations as she used to be. Then she stopped replying to my messages altogether. No explanation, no closure, just radio silence. It sucked, but I figured it wasn't meant to be, and tried not to dwell on it too much. For a while, I thought that was the end of the story. But oh no, it wasn't over yet. A couple of weeks later, Jake casually mentioned that he'd been talking to Sarah on Facebook. At first, I didn't think much of it. Jake's a friendly guy, and it's not unusual for him to chat with people I know. But then he started dropping little hints, nothing too obvious, but enough for me to realize that their conversations weren't exactly platonic. My stomach sank. I didn't want to believe it, but then the truth came out. They were dating. That's right. My best friend and the girl I'd been crushing on were now a couple. And here's the kicker. They've been together ever since. 3 years and counting. I mean, good for them, I guess, but at the time it felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't help wondering what went wrong. Did I screw up that badly on the date? Was I just not interesting enough? Or was it all doomed from the moment her brother decided to tag along? Story 7. I met a girl on the website. Her name is Amanda. She seemed perfect, beautiful, funny, and right from our messages we clearly got along well. So after a few days of chatting, we upgraded to phone calls. That went even better. Her warm and bubbly persona made talking with her easy. We would joke around together on the phone for hours each time, enough to fill a book just with these laughs and stories between us. So when the day came for us to make appointments on each other's company, things were looking up. She directed me somewhere which was neither near my house nor hers. A local wine bar for low-key chic conversation-level experiences perfect for first dates. The night of the date, I drove about 45 minutes to her place. I don't mind traveling by distance. If the person is worth it, it really doesn't matter how far you go. I pulled up to the front of her house in the driveway and immediately noticed that it was a damn nice setup. Something like, wow, okay. I was already dreaming of this potentially heading somewhere, even scoring a second date. Stuff looked pretty good. And then I knocked on that door. First, I was met by her dog. And when I say dog, I'm not talking about some cute little golden retriever, the kind that you could easily hunt rabbits with. No, this was a brood of dog, which seemed almost the size of a horse. It was barking loud, deep barks that shook windows and all over the door as though trying to force his way through, while Amanda was on the other side trying to get her vicious hound under control. I remained standing quietly at the door. After what felt like an eternity, although it's really quite possible it wasn't more than 2 or 3 minutes, she finally succeeded in pushing it open. Look, I'm going to level with you. This is where everything went unquestionably south. Amanda was, shall we say, maybe not the same as she appeared in pictures. By dissimilar, I mean she was at least 50 pounds heavier than her profile photos had suggested. Now I'm not superficial, and I understand that people are not always 100% truthful on dating profiles. Who is? But this was some quite clever advertising. Nevertheless, I told myself, just forget it. After all, possibly she simply hasn't updated her pictures in a long time. Although you are here already, and she looks friendly enough, give her a try. Besides, once we started talking, I discovered she was every bit as charming and funny in real life as she'd been on the phone. Her house was beautiful, I mean beautiful enough for glossy magazines, and the money she must have had flashed before my eyes. The furniture you would expect to see in, say, picture and diagram, all the latest trimmings, tasteful ornaments, and a wine fridge tucked in the corner of her kitchen. I took the mental attitude, well, you've come this far. The dog shows no signs of descending upon you, and she's well off. At the very least, you could make a new friend. So we made for the wine bar, and really it was fine. We chatted nonstop, and she had excellent taste in wine. Sharing a couple of bottles, we talked about everything from our favorite movies and the way back to travel, and I began to relax. I didn't feel that flash of romance, but I didn't feel angry about it either. Just sometimes, things don't turn out as you wish, and that's all right. I thought we could finish the evening on something of a high note and perhaps part as friends. That is when we shifted to her place. It was all right at the beginning. We continued to chat and laugh, seated on her couch, and I began to feel, well, it is not that bad here now. Maybe I will just stay the night and make the long journey back tomorrow. That is when things changed. Out of nowhere, Amanda stood up, took me by the hand, and led me to another room. I gotta give her credit for one thing. She caught me off guard a bit. It was not that I did not wanna. There were no plans at all. It was just the suddenness of taking me into something so different. We were discussing how overrated Napa Valley is 1 second, and then all of a sudden I am being dragged along her bed. Now do you remember the giant dog? He followed us in, and not only did he wait outside the door for us to walk in, but as soon as we entered, he jumped up onto that bed as if it were his throne. Amanda did not even flinch. She simply laughed and said, "Do not worry about him. He always sleeps with me. He will not bother us tonight." At this point, I am thinking this is different, but I can work with it. After all, I had been drinking. I was not exactly in the mood to argue about it, and maybe this is just how she is. After all, people sometimes are strange about their pets, right? I thought that I can put up with it. Big mistake. Here we are just getting into it, nothing too outrageous. As I try my hardest to ignore the fact that there is a massive dog lying on the bed watching us like some kind of furry chaperone. But just when things are starting to get hot, I feel something wet. It was only for a split second that I froze. My mind could not accept what was happening. And then I knew what it was. The dog. The dog was licking my butt. I was up and running out of that bed faster than at any other time in my life. Amanda looked at me, completely bewildered, as I scrambled to my feet and started backing off towards the door. "Something's wrong," she asked, genuinely surprised. "What's wrong?" I asked, staring at her as if she were mad. "Your dog just licked me in the ass. That's what's wrong." She attempted to laugh it off. "Oh, he's just curious, doesn't mean anything by it." But I would not be dissuaded. I put on my shoes, muttered something about having to leave, and bolted out the door before she or her dog could stop me. The drive home was quiet. I didn't even turn on my radio. I just sat there, reliving the events of tonight in my head and trying to figure out how my life had come to this. I don't think I slept at all that night, when none of that dog's licked tongue lurked on my skin every time I closed my eyes. Story 8. This is a tale that still strikes a chord in my heart. It wasn't really a date in the traditional sense of the word, but it was one of my most embarrassing, hilarious moments, or perhaps the most chaotic night you can imagine. Years later, when everybody has had a few drinks and is exchanging their most embarrassing stories, this kind of story will be retold countless times by me to those friends who are lucky enough. But at the time, it was rough. Fast forwarding a bit, the setting for our tale is Bangkok. I'd come there with a group of my buddies on what might be more generously termed a boys' trip. You know the kind, bargain basement air tickets, questionable life decisions, and oh yes, nights that just happen to start with "let's just have one drink," and wind up at 3 in feverish pursuit of one's own shoes. 5 days into our trip now, we are totally immersed in chaos mode. That evening, we stumbled upon a small bar where the atmosphere was just right. Not too dark, music playing at a volume that could prevent people from noticing how bad singers were, but not so loud as to make talking difficult without shouting over it. Locals from areas most expatriates might not recognize mixed up comfortably with backpacking travelers through Thailand's border areas. We were both feeling good after already throwing back several rounds earlier in the evening, and generally making some noise. Not a bad disturbance, however. We were not those kind of guys. Instead, we were just loud enough for people to look up. But as the night progressed, I saw this girl. She was small and dark-haired, seeming very chic the way the French do. Just that very taste, isn't it? Ones who simply seem, I never can fathom why, perfect. Like she stepped out of something and pleated her dress just this morning. She was with a few friends, but they didn't seem happy. A little off to the side, looking bored, I thought why not? So with my great intuition, and prodded by liquor more reliably than any Dutch courage, off I went to hit on her. "Hey," I added quite mystifyingly before she left. "You guys should join us for a drink." I was amazed when she smiled and said yes. Her friends were not as game, however. They gave me the stink eye as only a French person can, mumbled something in French, and well, they just walked away. Yes, they actually left her there. I felt sorry for a moment, then thought, well, their mistake. So she came with us to our table, and we all started drinking together. She ended up being a great hang. Let's call her Sophie. Sophie was funny, polite, and too cool to belong to the disaster zone that is us. But credit where it's due, she went along with it. We were all being idiots, having fun, and she just laughed like we were old friends. One of those times when traveling is at its best. Mine is more or less over by now. And you find people from totally different backgrounds uniting over a few beers and some really bad jokes. People were starting to be drunk, and after an hour or two, it was suggested that I and most foolish yet most least rational friends I know happen to hang out with do battle to see exactly who is the best drunk. Classic on. Drinking contest with simple, could anything be easier? Rules. Whoever slides under the wire and gets their beer down last pays for the next round. Everyone picked up a new pint glass, put it to their lips, and sprang into a quick toast. We were off and running. It was also on for real now. It was a race to the bottom of the glass, my man. And let me tell you, I was not taking it easy on anyone. No way was I shelling out for another round just because these jokers are too slow to keep up with me. I chugged that beer like my life depended on it. As I took it down, I could feel the cold running along my throat and landing heavily in my stomach. By the time I'd slapped the glass onto the table. Yeah, there were no two ways about it. This would be a day to remember for me. My mate got up with a grumble, then he went off. My second beer at once began to taste like victory, adding a little extra zing to my words for Sophie. Here's where things really took a turn for the worse. Projectiles. All over the place was spew. Not just a little bit either. This was full-on exorcist shit levels of exploding. And where do you think it went? Directly onto Sophie. Head to toe. Seriously, I'm talking hair, dress, shoes. All of it was on her. It was as if my stomach had just said, you know what? Forget this. And decided to eject everything I'd put into it for the past 3 hours and then some. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The table was silent. The pub. Even the music ceased for that brief second, though that might have been my own brain shutting down in sheer mental agony. And then the laughter began. Of course, first of all, it was my friends. They were laughing so hard they could hardly breathe, leaning against each other for support. Then it began to spread. Other people at other tables started to laugh. The bartender, the lady boys at the corner table, the chef at the back, even a random tuk-tuk driver who had wandered in off the street. Like a ripple effect, everybody in that pub was suddenly chortling uproariously at my utter, complete disgrace. And Sophie? Oh, Sophie. She just sat there for a second, staring in astonishment, her expression torn between horror and unbelief. I wanted to die. I wanted the ground to open up and swallow me whole. But then, to my absolute astonishment, she rose to her feet, dabbed at her face with a napkin, she hadn't started laughing yet, and said calmly and courteously, "Excuse me." Then she walked out. No screaming, no drama, just a peaceful, dignified left stage exit. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to follow after her, apologize, make things right somehow. But the other part, the part that was still grappling with what had just gone on, decided to stay where I was and let her go. She deserved more than any explanation I could have given her at that point. The evening was a blur after that. Certainly, I was not allowed to live it down by my friends. Every 5 minutes, someone would imitate the sound of me throwing up or make a joke about really going for it. I couldn't even be angry with them, they were right. I had made a fool of myself. By the time we stumbled back to the hostel, I was equal parts mortified and amused. Looking back, it's one of those stories that will seem funnier with time. At the moment, it was a nightmare. But now, well, now it's the kind of thing I can laugh about. And as for Sophie, well, I never saw her again. I hope she forgave me wherever she is. Otherwise, I hope that at least she got a good story out of it. Story 9. I did know him. I sat on his board of directors of one charity or another. He wasn't anyone I had been overly anxious to run into again, but for the little while we overlapped slightly in schedules, he looked pretty nice. He sounded educated, spoke well, and seemed to have his act together. When he asked me out, I thought I might as well go along with it. At any rate, even if the time passed slowly, with some free grub and polite conversation for company, it would be mine. Aggregate sum was far worse by picking up a stranger than sitting next in line. Derivative of the men who made him so, could just eat salad for a whole week instead, pampered. Say it is a free meal, no spray. It is the fellas from this chain Mexican restaurant, is where he suggested we meet. They may not be too exciting, but I was not faulting him for that. After all, I have had some great dates in very ordinary places, and wasn't expecting a meal, which would win any stars from Michelin. I agreed to meet him at 8, but actually came a bit early. Not because I wanted to be there and slap his hand in civil trial, but my father, whose hobby is flying airplanes, would be passing over above the bar momentarily. I really wanted to get an eyeful of him in action before we go inside, no matter what, so as is human nature, that kind of little indulgence is just as well, really ought to cause people who can afford. Precisely at 8 o'clock on the button, not a second early or late, my phone rings. It is Greg calling. I figure it's probably to tell me he's running late or perhaps to ask where I'm at. Not at all. Rather, he's saying that I'm late in an aggrieved tone. I look at my watch in bafflement, because there I am standing in the parking lot. Nothing else on my mind, and the sky all around me. This whole time I thought the flyover was pretty clever. But he just doesn't want to hear it. No, not one bit. He interrupts me mid-sentence and says something sour about punctuality. I really should have turned around and walked off then and there, but for some reason, sheer stubbornness, most likely, I stuck around. We go inside, and then things go from marginally annoying into the surreal. I pick up a menu, thinking that we'll have some small talk and get some supper ordered. You know, your basic date fare. But then Greg hits me with this line. We're not eating. You can't eat. I looked at him, blinking to clear my eyes, so I could see if I didn't understand what he was saying. What? I managed, trying to keep my tone level, because surely this was a jest, right? But no, he persisted. We're not getting food. We're having drinks. He said that as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, like I'd somehow missed the memo that this was a no-food date. Mind you, I hadn't eaten because, like any normal person going out to dinner, I just assumed there actually would be dinner. Anyway, Greg had other plans, it turned out. By now I'm regretting every decision that got me here, but my instincts say to go with it. So whatever. With that much money to drop on a car, maybe he's something of a cheap freak. I get a drink and try to turn the conversation to something non-controversial, but Greg has other plans. He kicks off, entirely unprovoked, into some political diatribe. And as if that wasn't enough, it's the kind so extreme and bizarre that I had to stop him mid-sentence and ask, "Wait, are you joking right now? You're serious? Are you joking?" Spoilers. Actually not at all, what he was saying. What he actually said was so wrong and so nonsensical that even I had to interrupt him mid-sentence. "Wait a second," I say again. "Is this a joke?" It was not. He was completely in earnest. I won't bore you with his opinions. Let us just say that they were not at all like my own, and he was expressing them with the zeal of someone preaching from the street corners with hand-painted signs. At this point, I am engaged in purely mental gymnastics trying to escape. My thoughts are turning the table. How do I get out of here? Should I hold my breath? Just stand up and leave? Enough of that. Greg suddenly thinks we could have an appetizer. We're making progress, right? Wrong. Because of course, I don't have any say in it. My attempts to suggest something are brushed off, and he orders us guacamole. Not just any guacamole. He insists on the part where they make it right at your table. And then, as if that were not bizarre enough, he proceeds to micromanage the poor server. Please only the onions and the avocado. No lime juice or salt, no other kinds of vegetables, just chop it up watching TV. It wasn't guacamole, it was mashed avocado and big hunks of raw onion. The server looked at me seemingly saying, "It can't be real, can it?" And all I could do was shrug my shoulders. But by then I could stand no more. I was finished in every way, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. There was no longer even an attempt to hide my annoyance. I was just sitting there, nursing a pathetic domestic beer the way you would your recovery, and smugly planning my escape. And then, in an unself-conscious flash of insight that leaves me speechless, Greg asked, "Are you trying to decide how to leave?" I looked at him for a moment and then said, I could either lie to him or tell the truth. It took no time to think it over. "Yep," I said. "That's exactly what I'm doing." Right then I walked right out. There are not going to be drawn-out farewells without sign-offs that aren't in any way true when your date is Greg cut to the chase. I did not even glance back to see how he responded because, quite frankly, it didn't matter. I was too busy wondering how one could have such a sterling bad date in such a short space of time. Driving home, I was torn between Vessel's laugh and smoke the whole way. The whole thing was so absurd that it almost seemed as though it might be a practical joke. Like seriously, was this guy for real? Who arrives late, won't let their date eat, goes off on political rants plus orders up the world's most pathetic guacamole. He is called Greg. Looking back, I'm sort of happy it happened. Not happy in the sense that it was a good experience. It wasn't. but in the sense that it taught me an important lesson about listening to my instincts. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And if that person turns out to be a dictatorial, self-absorbed guacamole pusher, run. Story 10. Every time I think about it, I cringe so hard that my soul wants to leave my body. It reads like a bad omen, and makes me wonder why I asked someone overweight to pass my phone across the table in the dark instead of brushing up against some handsome young light-skinned cameraman type who has nothing but good intentions for me. But alas. But here I am, still around. This is how I wound up going on a Tinder date with someone who is now saved in my phone as Donut Answer Penis Pic. You know where this is going, but trust me, it's worse than you think. I suppose it's off to a fairly ordinary start. 5 years of crucial decisions make or break me. I matched with this guy on Tinder, and at a glance, he looked promising, cute, nicely dressed in all of his photos that he appeared to be leading an orderly life. Over the course of several days, we messaged back and forth by chat app. He had a good sense and was charming too, even normal. Fast forward to SMS, and I met him on the phone. Not one word he said gave off any sense that this menace is dangerous and must be carefully watched out for. He had moved from California to my city for work, new and a bit worried but crazy about making friends. Not long after this, he left. It never occurred to me at all to question his motives, and he seemed quite anxious to meet me in person. Then why not give it a try? We had made plans to eat at some cool little restaurant downtown. On the day of our date, I arrived feeling hopeful yet cautious. I brushed myself up, selected a cute outfit, and went forward with expectations in hand. As soon as I walked in through the door, I saw him standing at the bar. In person, he was just as cute as his photos were. Good, tall, nicely shaven head, a lovely smile. So far, everything seemed fine, or so I thought, and was badly jolted out of that state by what next happened. He seemed bitter by the time I finished sitting down. Not just your average, new kid on the block who has a different unrelated kind of hatred, but seething about life bitter. He detested this city and everyone in it. He wasted no time expressing this. Okay, new age folk. I tried to nod in sympathy, but quickly found that he didn't want or need my empathy. He just wanted to complain. About everything in general. I tried to steer the conversation toward lighter topics, but he wasn't interested. Within 20 minutes, he diverted our conversation to sex. Specifically, he started talking about blowjobs. And has anybody else ever noticed that given the chance, not once has anybody ever asked him to do one of these? I gaped in astonishment as he was so far gone that he even began to gripe about how people here are not open about sex. I'm sitting there thinking, man, we just met. Try something else instead of the blowjob manifesto. But, as anybody who has lived through the Great Watermelon Walk knows, I'm pretty good at being put in awkward positions at a cocktail party. So I just sat back and let him talk, waiting for him to change the subject. Spoiler alert, he didn't. It just got weirder from there. At one point, the waitress came around to our table again. Instead of just saying, thanks, or ordering another drink as anyone would do, he asked her to go to a party at his company. Like that, he just brought it up out of the blue, and without any lead-in. Say, do come to my party. I am hosting one at my house. She replied, no thank you, but it was a warm smile of refusal through her teeth. I almost saw the waitress rolling her eyes as she left. I wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear. The night was already mentally filed away under the rubric of never again by this time. I thought that I could at least finish my drink and leave with grace. I decided to show him a picture of my dog, hoping that might bring the conversation back to more positive subjects. After all, dogs are always safe conversational topics, aren't they? Wrong. Dead wrong. Pulling out my phone, I called up a photograph of my adorable golden retriever and waited for the standard, ah. What I got instead was a smirk. If we are going to share pictures, he teases, pulls out his cell phone, and reveals his own photograph. This time it was a picture of his penis. That tacit. Just like in fact he showed me a picture of his penis. Grandfathered away. In a bar. Just as if that were a routine thing on first dates. I was too stunned to know how to react. My brain just shut down. All I could manage was, wow. Okay. He took this as some sort of approval, and just grinned at me like he had done me a favor. Meanwhile, I was internally screaming. What was happening? Is this real at all? At this point, I knew I had to get out of there. I made up some excuse about being up early the next day, and asked for the check. When our cars were brought to us at the valet stand, I prayed mine would be the first to come. Thank the valet gods it was. I mumbled a quick thanks, have a nice night. and took off before he could say anything else. So I thought that was the end of it. But no. A couple of hours later I got a text from him. Apparently, I dropped my sweater on the way out, and he'd picked it up. Instead of just, offering to meet me so he could return it, he decided to hold my sweater hostage. His exact words: "If you want to see your sweater again, you'll have to spend time with me." Needless to say, I blocked him immediately and retitled him as Don't Answer Penis Pic in my contacts, just in case he ever tried to reach out to me again. To this day, I still cannot believe the course that night took. It started out so ordinary, and then turned a hard left into crazy down. But hey, at least I got a good story out of it. And if nothing else, it's a reminder that sometimes losing a sweater is a small price to pay for escaping a truly terrible date. Story 11. So it started with a guy I met online. At first, he seemed all right, nothing special, but he made me chuckle a few times in chatroom talks and also seemed sincerely keen to meet. I was ambitious to think that none of my readers would ever fall into this category of people. Nevertheless, I thought it over and decided as follows. We get together, and from that different locational angle on things, there's no harm in discussing one's life before the public eye. Nothing bad could come of it, please excuse the pun. There was just this one problem going in. I lived a good hour away from him, and he didn't want to drive without getting something in return. Looking back on it now, I realized that should have been my first sign this guy wasn't going to work out, but at the time I thought, hey, fair enough. Gas is expensive these days. So I offered to pay $20 for gas if he would get me there. He agreed. When he showed up, I gave him the cash right away. This wasn't such a big deal, was it? Well, okay, not then. But it was about to become the biggest deal of all. We reached the restaurant, and it looked safe enough to eat in. Not elegant, but still not a total dump. I begin to think to myself, okay, maybe this will be all right after all. He orders food, and the conversation is, well, okay. Not terribly exciting, but not exactly bad either. He wasn't exactly sweeping me off my feet, true, but I figured what the heck. Maybe he's nervous. The first time out with someone is always hard. It's just small talk, and not everyone's good at it. What I didn't realize then is that this was the best behavior he could produce. When the bill arrived, I didn't even think twice, just grabbed it and paid. I had already insisted on paying for my share, so what was the point of making a fuss about it now? I paid the whole thing, $45 for dinner and $7 tip. So I started to feel like I am backing this date at this stage, but whatever, let him have the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he'll come up widely with another novel idea. Spoiler, no. We get back to his place, it's after dinner, and he suggests that we smoke hookah. He'd mentioned earlier that he likes it a lot, and I thought, why not? It was cool. And let's face it, I didn't feel like sitting through another awkward conversation at some coffee house or bar. Catch is, he didn't have any shisha. None. Zero. Zilch. Guess who ends up spending $25 on it? Yep. Me. I'm literally hemorrhaging money on this date by now, but I'm like, okay, fine. One more thing that might make him happy, and perhaps we can still save the night. We managed to get back to his, fix up the hookah and start smoking it. For the first 5 minutes, there was nothing wrong with it. And then out of nowhere, man, he takes a real hard turn to the left. He starts demanding sex. Not asking, not suggesting, demanding. And not in a playful or flirty way, mind you. No, this was almost full-on aggressive, bordering on raping someone. He's going on about how I owe it to him, and that it's only fair because he went to all this trouble for the date. There I sit, shocked senseless. What trouble? I was paying all along. What do you even say to that? I mean, the whole time, I'm just sitting there glaring at him. I was beyond sick of this. He's sitting there, crying about how nobody ever gives him a chance, and how women are so unfair. No actual tears in sight, just these guttural and dramatic sobs that look like you only get in soap operas. Anyway, let go of your drama, for now. I'm only mentioning it because I feel it once again. And that's when he starts doing this weird half-cry thing. Not tonight, not ever. I tell him firmly, and in a tone of finality. I feel this point is probably worth making clear. Because at any rate, by now I'm hardly drawn to him. Like he's lucky I hadn't left through the door by now. When my cab finally arrived, I was so sick of everything that I twitched into it, and for the whole way home, barely shifted my gaze out the window. Upon returning, I examined my wallet and discovered the whole blowout had cost me over $200 between gas, dinner, shisha, and taxi fare. I had practically paid to create the worst date of my life. I'm still angry at myself for not seeing the red flags when I look back on this. The gas money thing? Red flag. The fact that I paid for everything? Red flag. The aggressive, inconsiderate behavior? Huge, flaming red flag. But live and learn, I suppose. At least this date taught me to trust my instincts and never, ever let someone make me feel guilty for their idiocy. Story 12. If there is any single moment that captures the embarrassment, frustration, and sheer bad luck of my teenage years, it is this. So imagine this. One evening in high school. Go so hilariously wrong in all areas that it's still impossible today for me to tell the story without having fits of laughter, and feeling rather sick at the same time too. So the story begins. I finally managed to screw up enough courage to ask Sarah out. Sarah is the name I have given to this girl. I'd been waiting with an infinitesimal crush for some time, in fact. But after all these days of ecstatic anticipation, she finally did say yes. Poor and soon-to-be teenage. Teeny-wee me is crowing now, firmly convinced that this is going to be the start of an epic romantic chapter in his life. It wasn't. Now, let me paint a picture for you. It was the dead of winter. Not just a usual cold night, but rather one of those nights when temperatures reach 30 or 40 degrees below 0 Celsius. The sort of weather that causes even scarves to chill fingers to the bone, and could make you begin to question all your life decisions entirely. But I was undaunted. I wrapped up warmly, practiced my lines to Sarah as I walked, and was all set to blow her away with the brilliance of my conversation. Almost from the moment we met, however, something seemed wrong. Sarah did not appear at all enthusiastic about being there. She was withdrawn, detached, and never quite met my eyes. At first, I thought perhaps she was just nervous, but as the night wore on, her mood did not lighten. It was as though I were on a date with someone who had been required to come by force. I need to just write and write, pushing away an absolutely self-lacerating urge to rewrite everything. I don't know how much time I've wasted on that I didn't have, how little love and money I went without last year simply because my stomach was too weak to sit down over breakfast. But sometimes my hand would not pick up the tabloid paper its fingers grasped. I'm really contrite about this. I wasn't ready to start that conversation. And even if I had been, the other person might have just answered every one of my questions with monosyllabic grunts that really attenuated its peculiar comedy effect, because nobody who stubbed his toe could possibly share a laugh with this sad little creature of God like yours truly. The place was crowded with people, but not as crowded as it usually is. On every side of me from the moment I got up now were borrowers and lenders, all cowering in their turn salad bowls of unworkable UGMA plans. I hate crazy malice because that makes the blind man give up hope, yet it went away of itself neither sooner nor later. Now and then, usually every 3 minutes or so, I would raise my hand to wipe off all the saliva that had dribbled out onto the column I was trying to write from left to right with what passes for a pen these days and make it sort of more readable than a Chinese manuscript. But when the bus finally pulled away, the party was over. I was finished, emotionally drained, physically cold, and just wanting to get home as fast as humanly possible. Now, this is where things really do go pear-shaped. The bus stop was immediately next to a parking lot, and the parking lot itself had one of those thigh-high barriers all around its front. Rather than go around it as any reasonable person would, I thought to myself, why waste a few seconds? I'll put my foot over it. What a mistake. The moment that my foot touched that lip, I realized it was coated with a slick layer of ice. Before I even had time to think what was happening, my other foot slipped, and I went into full Charlie Brown mode. You remember the scene. The one where he tries to kick the football and ends up doing triple flips through the sky. That was me. I was airborne, flailing arms, pockets emptying as if my belongings were trying to get out before the catastrophe was complete. There was a dull thud as my body hit the ground, which seemed to reverberate through the frozen night air. My pants? Hanging torn more than a little bit. I'm talking about a catastrophic blowout, from waistband to crotch, leaving all of my parts hanging out on display for the whole world, at least the snowbanks, to see. My shin smacked directly into the metal railing, and the shock was immediate and blinding. Turns out I'd fractured it. Great. So there I was in the snow, pants shredded, leg frozen, dignity utterly obliterated. My only hope was that the rescue squad could get me before I died. After fumbling with my shredded pants zipper for a moment, I gathered the strength to fish around in the snow for my keys, wallet, and phone, stuffing them back into my pockets with fingertips an inch thick from frostbite. Then I tried to hunch myself so that my pants would provide some cover from this season's elements. That didn't work out, but frankly, I didn't care at that point. I only wanted to get home. Walking back was pure torment. Each dragging step sent a shock of pain rippling around my broken femur, and the icy wind only served to prick my exposed skin with frozen cones. I must have looked like some kind of deranged hobo as I made my way down the street, rubbish constantly spouting out at these enraged pants bunched up around ankles and slitted eyes filled from piercing wind lashes whatever obscured it. By the time I arrived home, I was so cold and miserable that I didn't even care what ill fate she might have been on originally. I just wanted to collapse on the sofa and never get out of bed again. Looking backwards, it's kind of humorous how perfectly terrible that night was. A bad date? Fine, whatever, I could have handled that. But the fall? The torn pants? The broken shin? That was just the universe rubbing salt into my wounds. It was as if I wasn't allowed to have a simple bad night. I had desperately wanted it to be the worst night possible. But hey, at least it gave me a good story, right? And if nothing else, I learned a good lesson. Sometimes it's better simply just to walk around the damn railing. Story 13. We met on a dating website. You know, the kind of website full of people who claim they are seriously looking for a lover, and so on, but actually really just want some attention or else love, and I don't even know chaos. In the beginning, he seemed tolerable. Not fabulous, but tolerable enough for me to give him a go. His messages sounded kind of sarcastic, but I thought, maybe he's one of those guys who's funnier in person. Spoiler, he wasn't. We decided to eat at a sushi place. I was pretty happy about this. I love sushi and think it's really delicious. Why wouldn't anyone? But damn it, from the moment I sat down, my man was throwing up red flags. You would have thought he was in drag parading around a Union Jack from the kind of maritime life-saving scenes and Soviet examples that guy gave rise to. The first words he spoke, no hyperbole at all on my word, were, "So, I'm an asshole." Without any frills at all, no preambling or introduction. He just announced right off the bat what sort of person he was, as though this were some kind of interesting data point on a trivia quiz. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he doubled down on it. This was actually a thing he said several times throughout the course of the evening, as if he thought it made him look better. Spoiler, it didn't. In his very first story to me, he said that he just really joined that online dating site to troll people. Troll people. That was his explicitly stated purpose for being there. But then, thanks to fortune oh so kind for getting me just this lucky, he saw my profile and decided he would try going on a real date for once. Wow, what an honor. Truly, I felt so glad that I had been picked from all the others who had clearly been his imitation for their amusement. It only got worse. Every single story he told was some variant of, well, here's this awful thing I did, yet at least I'm honest. So it's okay, right? No, man. It's not okay. When dinner rolls around, the matrix for dinner was italicized, tragically unpredictable. We sat down, and after reading over the menu, I tell the waiter I am still deciding. He just insists again that I order one dish he seems particularly fond of. I don't even remember what it was. I think a sort of roll. But I am very sure that at least while we are making our latest escape from the bland provinces, I said to him as if asking for some precious last favor and holding out my already burdened arms in this pleading way, "No, I don't want that." 5 forms of no's. But every time, "Look, I'm telling you you'll like this. Just go ahead. I mean, come on, people. I told you I don't want it." Was still hung up on whatever that thing was. Afterwards, he would not give it a rest until I ordered the cursed thing, just to shut him up. Spoiler alert, I did not love it. In fact, I barely touched it. My appetite was really quite ruined at this point. Any more surprises? After dinner, he suggested we go on to the nearby mall to hang around a little. I couldn't see any great virtue in the comparison. After all, who just goes wandering aimlessly about a shopping center half-walk to sleep? But I thought to myself, all right, let's get over it now. Going through the mall, things get pretty organized between us to standard polite indifference when we pass by an anime/manga store. Now, I really like that store. It has a lot of good stuff. I have been there many times before. So when he asked if I wanted to go in, I said, sure. Seemed like quite a pleasant change from yet another awkward tour. But he seemed unconvinced. He stopped and said, "Do you really want to go in? I don't want to force you." I was perplexed, but replied, "Honestly, I like this store. Let's go." And in we went, with me beginning to feel just a little bit brighter. Maybe this is the turning point in the whole evening, and we get some fun out of it after all. But I should have held my tongue. We must be in the store for about a minute. No, less than a minute. when he suddenly decided that I don't wish to be there after all. I don't want to inconvenience you. Let's leave at once. And as I am almost pushed out of the shop, I haven't even time to argue back. I was unable to argue with him because of my disbelief. Inside, though, was a different story. Man, what's your problem? If you didn't want me to go inside, why would you ask me in the first place? For real? I was so thoroughly disgusted I couldn't even laugh. I had been good, had been patient, but had had enough. The moment we left the liberal arts college, I came up with some kind of an early morning emergency and said I had to go home. He didn't protest, thank goodness, but it was plain he expected me to call him back or text him later. Spoiler, I didn't. I ghosted him so hard he probably still thinks I was kidnapped by extraterrestrials. In retrospect, I can't believe the number of red flags crammed into one night by this guy. The continuing bragging about being an asshole. Red flag. The rejection of a no answer. Red flag. The weird behavior at the anime shop. Red flag. It was like he was speed running his way through the how to make a terrible first impression tutorial. And the worst part, I don't believe he even realized how much of a jerk he was being. He probably still thinks he was just being honest. Suffice it to say, I never saw him again. I'm also a lot more choosy about who I agree to meet now. Evidently, if someone launches a conversation with, "So, I'm an asshole," it's curtains for me. No second chances, not even maybe he'll be different in person. Life's too short for meals with individuals who consider being awful to be a personality trait. Story 14. This is the one that still makes me cringe and laugh and get a little angry all at the same time. It's been years, but I'll never forget the sheer in-your-face boldness of this guy, or the fact that I found myself stuck in his car as he tried to get Prince to fly cover for him musically, while he hit on me in Hollywood's inimitable and incestuous tag team style. It's the sort of date that really makes you reevaluate heretofore held opinions on human behavior. Hold on to your chair, because this is the tale of how a decent evening bundled off the tracks in most spectacular fashion. So here's the setup, everybody. Back in college, I worked as a barista in a little cafe near campus. We had lots of regulars there, and this guy, let's call him Dave, was one of them. He used to come in a couple of times a week, always chirpy and chatty, and we'd built up a nice, no real polite you do your juvenile do mine kind of cheerful relationship/rapport. He was good looking, seemed bright, and had a sense of humor. One thing I did start to wonder about was that he'd stand around at the counter just a bit longer than he had to. And sure enough, as always, he would make it a specific point when coming through my set cashier window, even though somebody else was free. So when he finally did ask me out, I wasn't exactly spooked, I was flattered. I mean, why not? He seemed an okay kind of guy and hadn't been too much trouble around for me to sample his wares so far. Had he? With those details out of the way, plans changed to include sushi followed by a visit to a bar. The date actually started out going pretty well. I even enjoyed myself. Dinner was nice. All our talk proceeded smoothly enough. Nothing momentous was said or done. But he was an engaging, vibrant character nevertheless. He asked me about myself. He genuinely seemed to care what I had to say, and he didn't talk with his mouth full. Low bar for standards that it is. People fail constantly at this simple thing. Bonus points then. He also picked a good Japanese place for us to eat. By the time we left for a drink in the bar, I supposed, okay then, maybe this will work out after all. Still in the bar, things seemed to be proceeding more or less smoothly. He ordered us both drinks, nothing fancy, just your usual run-of-the-mill items, and we went on talking. Yes, there were a few moments when he seemed a little cocky, but it didn't stand out to me so much that it set off alarm bells. If anything, I thought he was simply keen to put his best foot forward and impress me. It was a perfectly decent first date overall. Not exactly fireworks, but not a disaster either. I wasn't sitting there mentally mapping out our wedding yet, nor was I forensically planning my escape route. Tonight, after the bar, he drove me home. He drew up outside my building, and just as I was going to say thank you and good night, I noticed something off. He wasn't moving. Instead, he killed the car, unbuckled his seatbelt, and uttered this expectant look. At first, I was confused. I thought he wanted to chat with me a little longer before heading out, so I was saying things like, "Well, thanks for tonight, I had a great time." But then in the most ordinary, casual way, he said, "So are we going inside now?" I blinked at him, really taken aback. "No," I answered. Then I laughed, because maybe he was joking. He wasn't. His frown deepened, and he looked very puzzled. "Why not?" he asked in a tone of disbelief, like I'd said the earth was flat. I could see him trying to make the pieces fit in his head, as if the idea just wouldn't compute. And then, whoa Nelly, the logic began. I did everything right, he said. I bought you dinner. I bought you a drink. So, I should get to come inside. That's how it's supposed to work. I just stared at him, completely gobsmacked. That's how it's supposed to work? Was this some kind of business deal list? Dinner, drink, sex. Like he had reached a new level on a dating app or something. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Hang on, I said, striving to maintain my voice. Do you really believe that buying me sushi means you're entitled to come into my apartment? Oh, sure, he said dryly, as though this were the most obvious thing in the world. That's how it usually goes. At this point, I was part mad, part baffled, and just plain freaked out. It wasn't just his sense of entitlement. It was the sheer flair with which he said it, as if he genuinely felt that it was like telling us all something inarguable about the universe. I tried to end the conversation as diplomatically as I could. Listen, I had a very nice evening tonight, but I'm just not going to have you over. But he wouldn't let up. Again, why not, he pressed. I mean, I paid for dinner and everything else. I thought we were having a great time. I'm sorry, I began to say, my tone growing chill. But we had a good time together. That doesn't mean I owe you anything. That's not how it works. I mean, if you think things weren't awkward enough, he starts arguing with me. Why you should get to come inside. I kid you not, this man just sat there in his car, in the dead of night outside my apartment, and tried to have a debate with me like we were in some sort of courtroom drama. What am I supposed to do? He exclaimed at the measure. This is wrong. I was really feeling anxious by this time. It wasn't that he had done anything overtly threatening, but the atmosphere was not good. Not at all good. And then I realized that he might try to follow me into my apartment or even force his way in. I was really starting to ponder an escape strategy when he suddenly reached for the car stereo. You know what? He asked. I think I know what the problem is. Oh no. Oh no. He hit play, and the opening chords of a Prince song filled the car. Here, he said, turning to me with a kind of self-satisfaction I have never seen. Listen to this. Prince is sexy. All girls dig Prince. I don't even know how to express the emotional tumult of that moment. How can it be put into words? Shock, revulsion, pleasure, wrath. I simply could not form a thought. This man who had just tried to argue his way into my apartment, was now trying to scam me with Prince. With no disguises, he said even. This will stir up the passion in you. I did not know how to reply to that. I just sat there frozen, while the song Kiss played in the background like some kind of fever dream soundtrack. Was he really expecting something to happen? Did he really think I was going to stop dead and say, you know what, Prince is sexy. Let us go in. Let me tell you, that was not happening. The instant the song had finished, I pulled off my safety belt and ran. I wouldn't even give him time to say goodbye. Open the door. Thanks for the ride, good night. I snapped the words out loud as I half flung the door open and sprinted off to my building. I did not look back. I did not want to know if he was watching me. I just wanted to get inside, bolt the door, and pretend it never happened. In hindsight, it's almost amusing, almost. But at the time, it was terrifying. The sense of entitlement, the heated argument, the Prince CD, it was like being trapped in some bizarre, misogynistic screwball movie gone really wrong. Needless to say, I never saw him again. And after that, I definitely started screening my dates a lot more carefully. But hey, at least I have a story now. And it serves as a good reminder that whenever someone tries to use Prince to manipulate you, you had better start running. Run and don't look back. Story 15. This is the story of how breakfast became one of the most insane mornings ever for me, and bad news busted up bumpers. So yeah, breakfast. This really changed things around a little bit. I mean, who would have known all this was going to happen just because I got ready and created a new face for the day, knowing that no matter what happened afterwards, no matter what happened in general, my dignity and probably my rear bumper would eventually be damaged. That said, it all started with this men's soccer team I joined. I couldn't run anymore, so I was just in it for fun while trying to keep busy and meet new people when we made the connection. Call her Lisa, let's. Lisa was bright and humorous. She swept the light away from any other woman in sight. We spoke a few times after games. I thought maybe why not ask her out. So after one contest, I wondered if she'd like to eat breakfast together on Saturday morning. Needless to say, I was very surprised when she agreed. I had a feeling that day was going to turn out pretty good. No, make that really good. You're doing good, man. You're out here making moves, and they're working for you. Saturday came. I showed up at her place bright and early. I'd been racking my brains for a week over where to bring her, but finally settled on this dump of a place that I'd been to a couple other times. It was cheap, the service was great, and it had a really cozy atmosphere not too far off from what you want on your first date. A place you can feel comfortable in. Inside, we sat down in a booth and ordered our food. I went for the garden omelet because it was healthier and looked like I was getting my act together. She ordered pancakes and coffee, and we enjoyed what was meant to be a nice quiet breakfast together at the time. When suddenly everything started going crazy. For a few minutes there, things were all right. We chatted about football, work, and other things two people on their first date might normally say to each other. Everything seemed fine. Then Lisa, oh boy, she decided to throw a wrench in the works. Suddenly, she started talking about what she kind of liked. And by what she liked, I mean she went into a detailed breakdown of all the kinky shit she was into. Breath play being dominated, whips, cuffs being hit, but, not too hard. She said it as if she were catching up with an old friend, matter of fact, and so proud of herself. Meanwhile, I was sitting there with my fork halfway to my mouth, trying to make sense of what was happening. It's not that I mean to shame anybody's kinks, no. You do you. But it was only like 20 minutes into the date, and I was unprepared for that kind of openness. As Kevin Hart would say, she was getting too fast, too kinky. I tried to keep my cool, nodding and throwing in the occasional, oh really? Interesting. But inside I was spinning. Is this normal? Is this something people do on breakfast dates now? Am I the weird one for not bringing my sex life up over pancakes? By the time the check arrived, I was both interested and overwhelmed, but then everything was going to change. There I was, ready to pay for breakfast like a proper gentleman, wallet in hand. But wait a minute. There must be a mistake. I checked pockets and turned bags over on their contents, then gave one last thorough search through all of my stuff. The wallet wasn't where it should have been after a night's football coaching. With a deep sigh, I wrote down Lisa's number. Then I left the money on the table and fled. She paid for both of us, and I said I'd pay her back on Venmo as soon as I got home. So we leave the diner, and I figure that's it. I drop her off, tell her thanks again for breakfast, and we go our separate ways. But when we pull up at her place, she turns around and asks, "Fancy comin' in fair make tea?" I might have hesitated at her invitation, under normal circumstances. But it would have been rude not to consider my own feelings and the fact that she bought me breakfast, didn't it? With complete idiocy, I agree. We go inside and things happen quickly, very quickly. 1 minute we're sitting on our couch talking. All we do is small talk. Next thing we know, it's in the bedroom together. And this young man's having some of his dirtiest, most mind-blowing sex up to then. Let's not get into that too much, but I'll say one thing was certain. Lisa meant what she'd said about her tastes, and then some at my expense also. Whips were present, among other things. I think she even called me sir on occasion. It was one memorable story itself. But who was going to object? I'm still lying in bed, and my brain is still trying to process what just happened. At that moment, my brain is in the fog of post-coital bliss where nothing seems real. And I am thinking to myself, wow, did that just happen? Then, however, the whole situation seems to take a sharp left turn for the worse. After Lisa's phone buzzes, she looks at the message and her eyes get as big as a dime. Then she sits bolt upright and says, in a complete panic, "Oh my God, you have to go. The boyfriend's off work unexpectedly, and if he finds us here, he'll throw me out of the house." What? I just sat there looking at her, trying to take in her words. "Your boyfriend?" I said in a voice thick with disbelief. This is the first I've heard of anyone being her boyfriend. Yet I never heard her mention anything about a boyfriend while we were playing kickball, while we were having breakfast, or during times when people could be expected to make some mention if somebody had a boyfriend. And now after sleeping with her, or at least with a woman in her boyfriend's bed, I now see, and not before. I feel sick. His sheets were on this bed. This was probably his pillow. Today's round of dates, for which she paid, remember, was financed by her boyfriend. I felt as though my stomach were filled with lead. Lisa was practically pushing me out of bed now, desperately trying to get dressed and throwing my clothes at me. "Hurry," she begged in a whisper. "He'll be home at any moment." And I did not need to be told twice. I got dressed in part. For example, I ran out with a sock in my pocket, my shirt inside out, and headed for the door as if my life depended on it. In my hurry to escape from there, I vaulted into my car and threw it into reverse. And flattened her mailbox. It was only when I heard that familiar sound of thumping wood and earth that I realized exactly what it was I had done. At that moment, I didn't much care. I raced out of there hoping her boyfriend wouldn't come along the road. When I finally got home, I sat in the car and thought over the final outcome of all this madness. There in the rear bumper, I suddenly saw a small crack, another nice reminder of my impromptu, make that unplanned mailbox demolition. Perfect, the cherry on top of this dung pile called mourning. Viewed in retrospect, the entire disaster seems almost comical in its completeness. The forgotten wallet? Embarrassing but fixable. The kinky breakfast talk? Just a touch too intense, but doable. But the real kicker became clear when I discovered that I had just made love to somebody in her boyfriend's bed. One thing's for sure, I never saw Lisa again. At soccer, I dodged her like a killer bee, deleted her number from my phone, and did my best to forget about the whole episode. Still, every time I see a cracked bumper or crooked mailbox, it's a poignant reminder of how sometimes the wildest stories come from the least expected quarters. Story 16. The boy's name was Jesse. I met him for the first time on our very own date. He knew we would end up married, with babies, and in love forever. Not so fast, spoiler alert, we didn't. To give you the set, I was 15 and head over heels for boys. Not a fellow who passed by omitted. Did I think someone called me lovely or held the door open? His name was written in my notebook accompanied by little hearts. So when Jesse came and spoke to me saying that I was a beauty, I bought it on the spot. Did I know much about him? No. Did that matter? No, it didn't. He thought I was pretty, and that was enough for me in my 15-year-old girl mind to consider him worth some of my time. We had met through a friend in common, and while Jesse wasn't exactly my type, whatever that even was in 15-year-old terms, he seemed harmless enough. With this quiet, artsy look about him, I thought he must be deep and full of mystery. In retrospect, I think it just turned people off socially. Who was I to gainsay, though? He asked me out. I said yes, thinking of all the romantic possibilities. Maybe he'd be my first boyfriend. Maybe we'd kiss. Preserve my epic teenage love story in these pages. We decided to meet up at the mall for our first official date. After all, the mall was the where else could 15-year-old us go this type of thing? It had food, it had stores to wander aimlessly through, and most importantly, it had benches where you could sit and awkwardly hold hands, pretending to be grown-ups. I felt nervous but also excited. I'd spent way too long picking out my outfit, trying to strike the perfect balance between cute and effortlessly casual. My mom dropped me off, and I remember walking into the mall with butterflies in my stomach, fully expecting this date to be the highlight of my year. At first, everything was fine. Jesse was sweet, maybe a little shy, but sweet. We walked around the mall, holding hands like we were in a cheesy teen movie. He bought me a soda from the food court, which at the time felt like the height of romance. I was thinking, okay, this is nice. He's nice. Maybe this could actually go somewhere. But then things took a turn. A very weird, very Jesse turn. We were sitting on a bench, just people watching and chatting about nothing in particular, when suddenly Jesse turned to me. And when I say he turned to me, I mean he fully faced me, grabbed my hands, and stared directly into my eyes like he was trying to hypnotize. I remember thinking, what's happening? Is this a thing people do on dates? I tried to play it cool, but then he spoke. Wow, he said, his voice all soft and serious. When I look at you, when I look into your eyes, I feel like I'm looking into your soul. I sat there in silence. My mind went instantly blank. I mean, what do you say to that? At 15, I hadn't even figured out how to talk to boys in general, nor had I ever experienced that kind of intensity. But Jesse didn't stop there. Indeed, he was just getting started. DF awesome, he said, obviously not my real name, but you get the idea. I know this seems soon, but I think you might be my soulmate. My soulmate. I just sat there, staring at him, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was this a joke? Was I being duped? But no use. He was deadly serious. He shifted his whole body to the front, his voice full of sincerity, as if he'd been repeating this speech in the mirror for years now. When I can't wait for you to be my wife, he said, taking my hands firmly, almost too much. And we have children. I won't want anything else from life except for our time together as a family. We're going to have such an amazing journey together. Yet another recollection for you. I was 15 years old, on a first date, and my date, this young man I had known for all of 2 weeks, literally throws out an all-but-marriage proposal to me in the middle of a mall. Besides marriage, He also envisioned an entire future together as guests, even our retirement house. A beautiful life. This is the problem that really bothers me when I was 15 years old, only to have an experience this size. I despised love tales that came short for the epic scale. I wanted to feel butterfly wings in my stomach. I wanted to live through dramatic scenes like those in movies, where Jeremy Irons makes dramatic declarations of love, and Helen Bonham Carter flies off into the sunset with him. But even my teenage self, extremely naive when it came to boys, but full of sentimental longing as any girl of the same age might be, perceived that this was unutterable excess. His were the wrong kind of caring about money. My non-rhyme, did you see it? Was there something I resemble? Belated but difficult. I felt a shock run through me. There was part of me that wanted to laugh. Another part wanted to get away, and still another part was rather confused. Was this normal? Do other people's dates go in this way? Am I the weird one out for finding it a bit much? But I was only 15 and didn't know how to deal with confrontation, so I smiled. I smiled and nodded like an idiot, hoping perhaps that if I kept silent, he'd stop talking. Spoiler, he didn't. He carried on and on about how uncommon I was, how he never felt this way towards a woman before, how much his finding me had benefited him. At the same time, I was screaming inside, "Is this really happening? Is this real life?" I managed eventually to get the conversation back on a less frightening tone. It was probably school or soccer, or anything that wasn't my hypothetical future children. But the mood had definitely changed, and now I could not stop thinking about what he had said. Each time he looked at me, the intensity radiated from him was palpable. It was as if he were already imagining me in a wedding dress. When the date finally ended, I practically dashed to my mom's car. I didn't even wait for Jessie to wave goodbye. I just did some stupid sort of half wave and awkwardly grabbed the knob of the door. Actually shut my eyes for the first time without feeling too horny. City led me into bed, where I lay all day with jelly legs poking out back at every slight sound. That long period of time came to an end because she entered one date and saying no luck on any others together. I guess it was destiny. I never met anyone else from then on. In the car on the way back, I told my mom everything. She laughed so hard she nearly had to pull over. "Well," she said, "at least you know he's serious." Serious indeed. Looking back, it is hard not to laugh at just how absurd this whole episode was. At the time it felt overwhelming and more than a little daunting, but now it just seems ridiculous. The pure gents of a 15-year-old boy thinking he has found his soulmate on a first date in the mall is actually rather impressive. And you know what's worst? This wasn't even close to being the last time that I saw Jesse. He turned up at one of my soccer games a few weeks later and spent the whole match staring at me like he was still planning our wedding. I started actively avoiding him just to keep my sanity. Story 17. The length of this affair. This completely big, genuinely awkward machine of a story is still haunting me every time I look at my phone. Well, anyway, I can laugh about it now, sort of, but at the time I literally wanted to crawl into a hole and die. It was one of those dates that starts off bad, manages to get even worse as time goes on, then adds an extra dollop of cringe right at the very end. If there's a hall of fame for botched first dates, this one should get its own entry. So let me set the scene. I was in my early 20s, innocent and happy-go-lucky. I was an utter idiot when it came to dating. I had met this girl, let's call her Melissa, in our local community theater group. She was beautiful, slim, and quick-witted. And of course, she was way out of my league, which made me even more eager to ask her out. To my surprise, she said yes. I was over the moon, convinced we'd be having one of those perfect, romantic dates that you see in the movies. Actually, not so much. We decided to go to see Cloudy with a chance of meatballs. Do not ask me why I thought that was an appropriate first date movie. Perhaps I flattered myself that an unusual choice would make me seem unique and interesting. Maybe I just wanted to see this film really badly. In any event, I collected her, we got some popcorn, and then we went into the theater. Everything was going fine, so fine. I was nervous but trying to act cool, making conversation while we waited for the previews to begin. But that was the onset of the unraveling. There was no way that I felt on the same wavelength, at least not after we started talking at all. Our opinions on things were quite different, politics, religion, you name it. And I was young and just plain didn't yet have the art of keeping quiet down to a science as I am now. As a result, you get stuck trying to figure out what to say next. Familiar disagreements quickly turned into lame half-arguments. We weren't screaming at each other or anything, but there appeared to be more and more pressure in the air, as I could tell she was just as uneasy as I was. Inside, I was kicking myself. How come you can't just talk about the weather, or how much you love popcorn like normal people do? When the film began to roll, I was already mentally declaring this date a bust. Instead of coming to terms with this and moving on, however, I made one simple but brilliant decision. I took out my phone and sent a text to my friend. Let's call her Megan, which said exactly what was happening around us. The date is going so badly. We have nothing in common. It's really awkward. Pressing send brought me a little relief. Okay, at least there's someone else out there who knows how miserable I am. But then ring went the unmistakable sound of a text notification. The notification didn't come from my telephone. No, it came from Melissa's phone. Time stood still. My insides dropped. I looked on in horror as Melissa fished her phone from her purse, opened the message, and started to read it. I watched her expression change in real time, from curiosity to puzzled bewilderment to oh. She finally turned to me and asked, with a hurt, disbelieving tone, "Did you mean to send that to me?" I swear, at that moment, I had what doctors call a near-death cringe. My mind was scrambling to find an explanation, but all I could manage was a stammered, "Oh my God, I didn't mean to send that to you. I was trying to text a friend. I'm so sorry. I must have accidentally clicked your name instead of Megan's, or replied to the wrong message thread, or something." To tell you the truth, I don't even remember exactly what I said because my brain was just screaming, "Fix it. Fix it. Fix it." In fairness to Melissa, she didn't immediately storm out or throw her drink in my face, which, personally, I'd say I deserved. She just looked at me for a moment, clearly upset, then said, "Wow. Okay." I could feel the weight of her disappointment, and it was colossal. I made one last attempt to preserve the situation by blurting out something like, "Anyway, despite everything, I really do enjoy your company. You are so brilliant and beautiful, and I am just such an idiot for screwing this up." Which was true. She was from a different world, and I knew it. However, she managed it. She agreed to see the evening out and complete the date, as friends. Suffice it to say, prettiest friends meeting of my life. We didn't even talk while watching Cloudy with a chance of meatballs. That, let alone anyone else. Up until the last minute, I couldn't enjoy the movie. All I was replaying this disaster over in my head. Each time I looked over at her, I had this vision of her glancing down at the phone. She was most likely replaying the part where I'd texted her about her. When the movie finally ended, we walked out of the theater to our cars, said our goodbyes, and went on our separate ways. I was greatly relieved because it was over. Another nail-biting day at least, but also deeply embarrassed. Just like that, it seemed pretty sure to me this would be my last encounter with Melissa, if you didn't mind. But wait, it gets worse. The text I sent to Megan telling her all about my date. That was the last time they let me text from the back of a cab. Since apparently, if you haven't learned yet how texting while you're in your feelings can ruin relationships, no amount of actual experience will teach you. I tapped out a long message to her on how odd the date had been, how I'd texted Melissa in the movie, and assured myself there would never be a sequel. Got it all off my chest bar one thing. Pushed send. The phone vibrated in my hands, and the blood rushed to my head. "You sent it to me again. It was a mistake." I don't remember anything after that. In all likelihood, I fainted. It was all I could do not to respond to what she'd written, and to let her know I wouldn't be the one doing the calling anymore. I wasn't physically capable of any other action. What could I have said at that point? Oops. My mistake. Hardly. There was no recovering from this. Melissa deserved better than that, and I deserved my shame sitting squarely on me to think over what had happened. Thinking back, I can laugh at it most of all. It's also a story that ought to warn you. Never text while you're still on a date about the date, and who you're sending messages to should be checked twice, or even 3 times. Take my word for it, it's worth the effort, because otherwise, you might end up as I did. The person who accidentally texted his date twice on one date itself how bad things were going. And believe you me, that's an award which nobody ever wants to win, but is his at last. Story 18. A couple of years ago, I was still going through a breakup. And this wasn't one of those we just drifted apart kind of breakups. No, this was messy, ugly, and it completely destroyed me mentally and physically. So when this deliciously broad-shouldered man that I worked with asked me out, I just went for it. He was charming, witty, and to be honest, I wasn't used to it for a long time. My self-esteem was constantly being trampled by anyone who wasn't actually trying to make it feel worthless. I thought, maybe this is the start of something different. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Anyway, he picks me up for our date, and everything seems fine at first. He's being sweet, complimenting me, asking me about my day, basically, all the usual first date stuff. Then he lets loose the first verbal bombshell. Hey, I really want to go see the new Twilight movie tonight. First of all, let me just say that I have nothing against Twilight or anything. It's just that I never got into it. Vampires and werewolves? Sure, okay. But love triangles so sullen they bleed out angst all over the floor, and guys who gleam in the sun while they're brooding on their mat-kneeled logs? It doesn't really float my boat. Still, I thought to myself, well, why not? He seemed so enthusiastic about it that I didn't want to be a wet blanket. Thus, against my instincts, I consented. What he hadn't told me was that last night was opening night for Twilight. Oh yuck! If you're not already creeped out now, you will be in a minute. Since the next hour would involve explaining to vast crowds of teenage girls where we each were in line, the thought made my toes curl. Normally, this would have raised a giggle, except that the very phrase never left my lips. As for giggling, we weren't anywhere near that much fun yet. Well, no sooner had I managed to tell them about my contacts and glasses not fitting properly under the helmet of my batting equipment, as any good third batter should do. More accurately, Andrew Jackson already had said boys after 2 warnings get rid of everything they have now on them but their jockstrap, Julia. Especially at midnight during exam season. Anyway, everyone had long lines before us, the one nearest us being lengthened by so many girls, once again to be reordered earlier. Talking about taking steam out of a fast overtaking car. Well, at school during swing out, cheers were shouted from half a block away, and then if at any time somebody so much as mentioned Jacob and Edward, let's say pleasant dreams. I consider myself basically well educated and never have heard the likes of this before. Tight popping noise that kind of makes your middle ear feel full of air, each shriller than the last. Just thinking about the sound, I could taste little round granules of popped corn jammed on my teeth. Now try to play it straight too. And so I continued past the TV trucks, still plastering on that artificial grin. I would rather die inside than let them see how badly all this made me feel. But then it got even worse, because I had gotten into one of those moods where nothing mattered at all, and now the one thing left went bad too. After all, I had heard cliché enough hell, it's a G nevertheless in English, nothing at all. New review, September 1st, 2005. The usual sort of girl. We stand in line waiting, and I try to block out this madness all around me when I feel something looking at me. You know that feeling? You get a sense of it before you even turn around, right? So I turn my head but do not bother standing up. There she is, standing cheek to jowl with him 1 row back, staring straight at me. My old boyfriend's war-axe sister. All these people on Earth, and now. She gives me a look like it just so happens that my entire life has fallen over Bromwich, or something equally despicable. For the record, I never really liked her even back when things with my ex were good. She was the type who feeds on conflict, always has something mean to say. And here she is now, standing in line for Twilight, about to make my already uncomfortable night even worse. Can't ignore it. I couldn't escape from her at all because when we finally got to go into the theater, who pops up sitting down right near me but... Right. The sister is there, sitting right next to me, sharing armrests with me. I couldn't make it up if I tried. Now I'm sandwiched between my date, who is way too excited for this movie, and my ex's sister, who is practically radiating hatred, trying to pretend I'm fine. Then the movie started, and that, I don't mean any offense, but if you are a fan of Twilight, I just couldn't get into it. Whenever Jacob took off his shirt, the entire theater burst into an ear-shattering, high-pitched, whoa, whoa. It was like being in a concert for screaming banshees. In the meantime, I'm just sitting there, bored to tears, trying to avoid eye contact with the human ball of spite sitting next to me. After what felt like forever, the movie finally ended, and I was ready to call it a day. But my date had other ideas in mind. He wanted to go back to his place for some drinks. Since I thought that I had deserved a stiff drink after surviving that, I said yes. He was really hot, and I was still in the phase after breaking up with someone where I had to show myself I could move on. So we went back to his place, had a few drinks, and then one thing led to another. Now, this is where things went downhill fast. Needless to say, this guy was lousy in bed, very lousy. I mean, I've had some SOSO experiences, but this was just off the scale awfully bad. It was like he'd read a book about sex written by an author who never actually experienced sex. Lying there, I thought, get through this, everything's alright. Get through this, and you'll never have to see him again. But after that disaster, I was ready to leave. Then, he hit me with the creepiest vibe just before midnight. The next morning, before leaving for work as usual, he turned and said to me, "I want you here when I get back." Oh, really? I kind of laughed it off. I thought he might be joking. But when he got serious, I couldn't help but feel that there was no way to explain such a strange request. So he said to me very earnestly, "No, really. Please don't go. I'd be so happy if you stayed. I really want you to stay." This is the point where all my alarms start to go off. The way he said it was sort of like begging, and when he did, my skin crawled. I tried to act casual, telling him I had to go home and get ready for the day. But he would not let it go. He kept on asking me to stay, and the more persistent he became, the more uncomfortable I felt. In the end, I gave him an offhand okay, just to get him to leave. As soon as he was out the door, I collected all my things and walked out. I thought that was an end to it. Just another bad date to put on the list. But then, a few months later, I saw his face in the news. Evidently, he'd been arrested for murder. Real, actual murder. And I had just been sitting there, watching it on TV, trying to take in the fact that I had dated, and even slept with, a man who turned out to be a murderer. I even Googled his name to make sure it wasn't some strange coincidence. No, it was just him. Same face, same name, same creepy vibe. Story 19. 2 years ago at a party, I met this girl. Let's call her Sarah. She was cute, humorous, and seemed quite relaxed at the time. We were easy with each other, got each other's phone numbers, and for a few days afterward, the texts flew back and forth. Nothing particularly deep, just the usual "how's your day?" type or "hello, what are you doing?" After a couple of days of this, she asked me to her home. I thought to myself, good chance ahead of you, boy. So I went over to her house, and everything was copacetic at first. She let me in, took me to her room, and I thought, this is getting somewhere, now we're cooking. It wasn't one of those awkward big group hangouts where you meet your date's entire family en masse. It was just the two of us. What a great frame, right? Wrong. The minute we got settled down in her room, she pulled out her phone to text somebody. Now, I'm cool with this. I'm not asking her to sit and give me 100% of her attention every second. But this was pushing it. It was at a whole extra level. As if there was nothing but empty space all around her, and not a single human being left in this world except her. I was invisible with the doors closed. She wasn't an occasional phone checker. She was in touch with the world. I might have yelled, "Hey, your house is on fire," and she went stone deaf. Politeness was my first impulse. "How have you been?" I asked. But the clicking sounds of thumbs on a handheld screen offered neither a hello nor a response. So she's dissing me. Anyway, I tried one more time. "Did you go out and do anything fun these last few days?" Nothing. She wouldn't even look at me. There I am staring at some girl that called me over, and she's not listening. Bombs could have been dropping. Aliens could have been landing. And all this girl would have noticed was if some text came in on her cell phone. A few minutes of embarrassing silence passed. Then I realized two things. One, she wasn't going to give me any attention anytime soon. And two, for the life of me, I couldn't get why I was still there. So I did what any reasonably self-respecting guy would do. I quit sitting around at someone's house being ignored and started wandering. I left her room and continued onward into the home. I might just as well check out everything else they have here if she is not going to talk with me. I poked my head into the neighboring room, which turned out to be a living room. There I met her mom and sister. Now you would think that this might get even more embarrassing, but initially, they were pretty nice. They were decorating for Christmas, and before I could even tell my story, they asked if I would come and help them. "Let a strong man come," her mom said with a laugh. Her sister, of some attractiveness, Kat, called out, "Come on, help us." I couldn't help but think it was time for some people to wake up. Sarah obviously didn't want to hang out with me, so she could fend off at least one of those fighting windmills. And anyway, Sarah's sister looked nice. I spent myself into what would be called one of these "I met the wrong girl, but things worked out with her siblings" stories. That optimism lasted about 5 minutes. What I found was, Sarah's sister was not only fairly attractive, but she was also nuts. Laughing with a snort, there seemed to be no stopping her from letting out flatulence, without the slightest apology or care in the world. And her mom? No better than that. They were at each other's throats over where to put the decorations as soon as the two of them had a good chance. Not in a funny way, though. It was like watching a reality show on cable about completely dysfunctional families. And on top of that, as I brought up garlands and threaded Christmas lights, the two of them just stood around arguing. I was basically an unpaid intern in their holiday chaos. After 20-odd minutes of this crap, I thought I could take no more. I told them I would be leaving, and their parlor became completely silent. Dead silent. They just looked at me as if I had committed some heinous crime. It was so uncomfortable and tense in the room that by the time I got out of their door, I felt like I had to wash off all this embarrassment in a shower. Step ahead a few years. I can't recall I had contact with her, and for that matter, I'd almost forgotten the whole thing. But next thing you know, she invites me to a Halloween party. I was hesitant at first, and with that initial experience, I did not feel any rush to return. However, something piqued my curiosity. I decided to go and check it out. Perhaps things had changed. I arrived at the party more than anything else. Normally being equipped for a fallout's enough, drink, songs, and chat the average. Sarah was there, had a couple of words with, but it was plain she was not having any of my suggestions to turn in. She was a guy I was happy to peruse. The man appeared to be a nice sort. We talked about sports and so on for quite a while. He was sitting in a chair the whole time, so I didn't get to know him too well, but he seemed pretty ratings high. Everyone having a good time. In the middle of the night, I reckon I should go home. When I went to shake his hand, he stood up, and that was when I saw two things. First, he was missing 2 fingers on his right hand. Second, he had a real peg leg. No doubt about it. The guy was dressed up as a pirate. He was really giving it his all, even had an eye patch on. I couldn't tell whether it's a coincidence or just deciding to take the plunge, but anyway, I felt he was really something. I shook his hand, what was left of it, and then wished them both luck. As I left, it was like disappearing into the middle of some surreal dream sequence. Story 20. Potential was in the air. A good bit of potential at that. Lunch was okay. Serviceable stuff from the office staff. The conversation was able enough, the guy could be said at least to be a kind of human being. Not exactly great, but good enough that I thought, so this is what we're doing now, okay. So when he suggested afterwards that we go play tennis, I said, why not? Now let's be clear about this. I am not a tennis pro. I'm not even what you'd call athletic. Nonetheless, legging it out on the court is a pretty casual game, and I just felt that it might be worth spending an afternoon trying it. In addition, it's 80 degrees and sunny as anything today. A perfect day to be outdoors. I was actually looking forward to it a little. A little friendly competition, a little exercise, fit flirting now and then. What could go wrong? Apparently a lot. So we get to the courts. At first, it's a fun time. We're just batting the ball back and forth, nothing too heavy, and I begin to think, hey, this joker has unusual character. This might plausibly turn out well. But the first inkling that maybe things were going to hit the skid came when he began treating the game as a serious matter. Like out here grunting like we were at a championship final in Wimbledon. I'm over here on my side trying simply to keep the ball in play, yet he's diving shots, serving them up hard, and punching the air after every point. I mean, it's good you want to do credit to your date. But would you mind toning it down a bit? It's tennis, not the US Open tryouts. But by the time we arrived at the 9th game, I was sopping wet, totally out of breath, and frankly just done. The sun was burning into my skin, my hair stuck onto my face, and I stunk of a gym bag that had been sealed up in a hot car. No kidding, I was ready to hang up my racket, get a big drink of water, then head home for the longest shower I'd ever taken in my life. But instead of having time to even figure out that the game was over, he came rushing across to where I stood like a golden retriever that has just fetched a tennis ball. And then it happened. This man who was streaming sweat and stink, wrapped me up in a full-body hug. The whole thing, I mean. Chest to chest, sweat mixing with sweat. I turned to stone. The moisture of his shirt seeped into mine, and I felt like I was about to leave my body entirely. But before I got a chance to pull away, he moved his head in closer to mine and kissed me. Not just a peck, not a tender, hi there friend kiss. No, this was a tongue kiss. A full-on, frontal assault of the mouth, no warning tongue-in-the-mouth kiss. I don't know if you've ever had to take in disgust and shock at the same time, but let me tell you there's a lot. My mind was screaming, why is this happening? And my body was trying to struggle away from the combination of sweat and saliva. I had to literally push him off, both hands on his chest, and say, no, no, no. In front of several complete strangers, I headbutt my husband. "Thanks for this," he says as his nose begins to bleed. He looked confused just like that. "What the hell?" His sister dubiously raised a hand to the ticket agent. "Question, can I take this as hand baggage?" she asked. The bear, outside, was removing our check-through luggage. After 5 minutes or so indulging in this joyous occupation, he was interrupted by other passengers entering the hall. A listless Mojave sunset shone through an inexplicable rent in the temporally shifting gray of the terminal, giving askance to surrounding panic and establishing it as a product, if not precedent, of human existence. My bag was already on the way by then, and I slid all 10 fingers gently over its surface, feeling, however, that something else would pass before we went in to retrieve our possessions from customs. On the neighbor's advice, we took our carry-on bags to camera, which made for some curious conversations with guards and inspection of the U.S. Customs seal on the toolbox at Terminal's car rental office behind the Citrus Liquor Shack. On a domestic flight, I turned to see a woman across the aisle playing games on her cell phone. She wore sunglasses. They were covering the irritation in her eyes. But I want to know the truth. What is it about some men that forces them into believing the very first kiss must be perfect in every way and utterly romantic? Who could write it better? "You're welcome, stop sending me crap like this. Gee, I think I'll just have another bowl of wine with my triumph, as an invented phrase maker publicity will be here to stay. Yeah, right. The first kiss doesn't have to be any of that. Your friend is subtlety. Be your friend also. And when you've just spent an hour working at the treadmill, sweating 4 liters per minute, oh, please don't be in a hurry about kissing anyone. You're not smelling too good right now, my man. Wait until tomorrow instead for a bath before trying those things, dear." The timing. Ever notice how women drop the subject immediately if you say your mother was 18 years old when she got married? We mention this to illustrate how steps are overlooked in formative years. Now you'll never hear another word from her about her husband or his ridiculous debt. Just smiling and nodding from now on. Grab that check.